Welcome.
Bonjour.
Vous écoutez le podcast Dirty Feet sur les ondes de No More Radio.
You're listening to the Dirty Feet podcast on the No More Radio Network.
Nous sommes vos animateurs,
Et animatrices.
We are your hosts, Allison Burns
JD Papillon.
Et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
Listen in.
Écoutez.
We're gonna move you.
Hello, you're listening to the Dirty Feet podcast. I'm Katie Belanger, and I'm here at Studio 303, the beautiful, shining Studio 303. We're actually in the studio recording the podcast. It's very enjoyable already to be here with Miriam Ginestier, who's the artistic and general director of the studio, and then also Andrea Joy Rideou, who is one of the most senior staff members. So there's some giggling. So maybe we'll get into that. And I want to just jump right in and talk about Studio 303 and its activities, its mandate, its place in the community, and then also what is this Cabaret Tollé that's going to happen on Saturday the 19th, and why a Cabaret Tollé. So starting with Studio 303. Studio 303 is a place that supports live art. So, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, but with a focus on dance. And I'm interested to understand you've been here a long time, Miriam, but you are not a founding member of Studio 303. So maybe we could discuss a little bit about the foundation and, of the studio, and then a little, maybe like a little piece of highlights of how the history has gone on, because now we're in our 26th year of the studio.
Okay, you want me to talk about the founding of it?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was founded in 1989 by three choreographers who wanted, they were just resource sharing. They wanted a space where they could rehearse, teach, so earn a bit of an income, and also show their work and development. So, and it's fun to go back, because actually, really, those founding pillars are, they're the foundation, and they still are, as much as it's changed. And two of the members, I think, Jo Leslie was one, and she left perhaps, I think after a few months, if I'm not mistaken, and Isabel Van Grimd after about a year, and Martha Carter stayed on for 5 years, and then perhaps shifted to more of a board role, or, she was kind of always involved and a bit of a benefactor in the early days, and a real leader. So, and I came on board very early with Paul Kasky. He was dancing for her, and, was a kind of self-taught technician, lighting designer, and was doing maintenance, cleaning, and I was doing administration, but just in exchange for classes at the beginning. So we were both self-taught and grew in the studio. And I guess after 5 years, Martha said, I'm not even here. I'm always on tour with Chouinard, so can you guys take over? So we took over the co-direction. Ooh. And, and then the studio's really, it's kept its foundation, but it's changed a lot over the years. It's always had a lot of interdisciplinary activity. The workshop programming has always been the backbone. We had a lot of signature events that lasted maybe, 4 editions, like, the Home Show or Bruit du Noir, which went on for almost 10 years. Vernissage Danse, something like 147 of them. And I guess our specialty was short works and things that brought a bunch of artists together. And things have changed in the past 3 years. So we're getting a little more focused, a lot less on presenting and more on supporting artists at different stages of their career and development.
Maybe you can tell me about one of the things that I love about Studio 303 is the training aspect. So there's always there are many ways to train as a professional dancer in Montreal. The RQD offers amazing classes. The Circuit is offering things. But one of the things that I think is very interesting about Studio 303 is the diversity of the offerings in the morning. The Atelier Pro, the professional workshops, and also the depth of the work in these workshops and the ongoing. You have many artists who come back year after year and teach. So there's both a development of these teachers and their ongoing professional development in their teaching practice, but also it gives the dance community and also the artistic community more widely, because I've been here many times when there have been people in the class who are by no means a professional dancer, gives this basis of training that's just really diverse. So I can't even imagine how much fun it is to put together that offering. And so maybe you could tell me a little bit about how that gets put together and why it is that continues to be a real backbone of what Studio 303 does.
It's funny that you ask that, because that programming the workshops is probably the thing I've thought about the least, in a sense. It was the hardest thing to put down on paper when I went away on sabbatical, on how to program the workshops. And I realized that so much of it was intuitive. There's kind of, I guess, improvised logarithm things going on in my brain where I'm seeking a balance between just teachers that are popular or who get, who've been coming back year after year and have kind of fan base, and then new workshops, and then stuff that's going to please the people that are into somatics and body awareness, but then keeping some real edgy stuff in there. And so that was so hard to try to quantify and create logic around it, But it's funny because this week I just did a workshop, and it's the first time I've done one, probably I attended it in 5 years, and it's fun to put it together, but it's a lot more fun if you take them too. And I took it, and it was really gratifying because it's not often that I push a workshop through out of personal interest, and I'm a bit conflicted about that. What's the balance? How much should be just things that were recommended by the outside or applied, and this was really someone I really wanted to invite. And I do a lot of tango outside of Studio 303, and it's dance, but it's a completely separate community, especially the queer tango community, which is already a little separate from the bigger tango community. So this is a queer tango teacher, but who has 30 years experience and a really solid background in body-mind centering, authentic movement, a bit of Alexander technique. So I asked her to create a hybrid workshop that would draw on all of that. And it was really fantastic. It went so well, and I would say it was about a third professional contemporary dancers, a third people with tango background, and then a third like visual artists and other category. And at the end, when people were giving feedback, that was something that came out. Some of the contemporary dancers said that it was, that they do this kind of work, deep, somatic, they're totally comfortable with that kind of work, but to do it with a totally diverse crowd, not just the same people. And of course, working with the same people, you can go deep, and there's a lot of benefits to that. But when it's only the same people, so that was super gratifying, and it was hugely eye-opening for the tango people. And so I was really pleased with that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, as somebody who comes to the workshops relatively regularly, that I find super rich about it is the diversity of people who show up and the diversity of people who are welcome. Like, I remember the first time I sent an email to ask if I could be admitted into one of these workshops, like if I could register. I was still in school, and I'm like, do I have to be a professional? Is it okay if I come? And there was a bit of an explanation about the Emploi Québec aspect of it. So, because you're receiving funding, I understand, from Emploi Québec.
Yeah, Emploi Québec is restrictive. It's for professionals living in Montreal who aren't students, but also we offer non-subsidized workshops. So that's another thing we really have to balance, because we want to keep them open, but we sort of, we have to follow some of those guidelines. But at least a third of our workshops are independent.
Yeah, and so I ended up taking something that wasn't subsidized, so it all worked out in the end. And it's, I guess it's just this wonderful community that forms, and that means that people are welcome to come, like there's no pressure. And that's glorious, because there's a lot of times when what's being proposed is very profound. What's being proposed as a subject for the workshop for the week is very intensive. It requires a lot of your attention and your mental and physical energy. And if there's this sort of pressure on top of that you have to perform because you're a technique class, at least for me, that doesn't really work super well. So I think that that's been a really powerful thing to see and understand about the role of Studio 303, is because when I come here, I see a lot of that, a lot of people that I don't necessarily see at other kinds of class necessarily. So that's, it's interesting to hear about all the different people who came this week, because I think that that's, from my experience of taking the workshops, very typical, actually. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the presentation series. And so when we begin to talk about presentation here, I know that in the last 9 years that I've lived in Montreal, this presentation series at 303 has just sort of shrunk and shrunk. And so maybe that's going to get us on the topic a little bit about funding. But I wanted to discuss, before we discuss the Cabaret, to discuss a little bit about edgy women and then now edgy Redux, and how the transition was made from one to the other and why.
Okay, well, this is Andrea. And I'm actually, my official title is the technical director. And for the past couple of years, I've been co-curating and then taking on a bit more curation responsibilities while Miriam was on sabbatical for specifically Cabaret, Tollé, and Edgy Redux. So that's the perspective that I'm going to answer your question from. The transition between edgy women to edgy Redux in 2013, we suffered a rejection from Heritage Canada that significantly changed our presentation capabilities. Studio 303 ended up losing about 15% of its overall budget. Those numbers actually translated into Edgy losing 85% of its budget, approximately. So what had grown in over 20 years into a 3-week festival then had to dramatically be cut down to a 3-day festival or 3-day event. And it was actually Miriam's decision to rename from Edgy Women to Edgy Redux. I think I'll let you speak a bit more about that, but I think it just basically it was kind of unrecognizable at that point. So it needed to kind of be reborn as something else during the transition.
I don't know. I just didn't want people to think, to go, oh, why is the festival so small this year? So it was really just the renaming felt important because, and also the last edition of Edgy Women was also a kind of particularly spectacular one because it was the 20th anniversary and it had a really special focus. It was art, sport, and gender. It took place on a hockey rink and in we did a big happening with like 10 different artist groups in a boxing club. So it just felt like to go from that to a one-night cabaret, Nuit Blanche, and a conference, it wouldn't be, it would be hard to generate enthusiasm for the 21st edition of the festival shrunken. So we really decided, I decided to call it Edgy Redux, which actually I thought meant smaller, and in fact it doesn't mean smaller at all. It means remix or new perspective or repeat. So it still makes sense, but not the way I thought. And I'm not the only one who thought Redux meant smaller. And so it was an opportunity also to just kind of zoom in on stuff as well. And
So this year, Edgy takes the form of 3 events, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a wickathon, and there'll be a cabaret evening, And then there's also All Nuit Longue, which is the Nuit Blanche event. I was here last year on Nuit Blanche, and there was like a marathon of video and performance. I think by the time I got here, it was like 3:30 in the morning. It was still going. And it was really amazing, actually, to see sort of, I wish I had been there at the beginning of the evening and then to see at the end of the evening, because there was this sort of, the energy was very particular. Let's put it that way, that there was this sort of, determination and perseverance aspect to the end of the evening, which was, really interesting. And also sort of a weird gonzo atmosphere of like, we're so exhausted. Now what can happen? Oh, we can play the same video 15 times in a row and it can just evolve and evolve. So, it was wonderful. It was really great. And, I love that Edgy gives voice to very particular kinds of artists and has a really like, I knew as soon as I walked through the door, I was really going to have an experience when I got here. Like, it was not going to be like anything else going on in the Belgo building on Nuit Blanche. So can you speak to maybe a little bit about the 3 events, why those things, and what you're looking forward to about those things?
Okay. Well, one of the survival measures that was given to us by the board after the big cut in 2013 was the request to essentially create a season template and repeat that template 3 years in a row while we sort of like took stock, gathered up some resources and momentum, and then envision the future. So we have been engaging different themes and artists, but the sort of concepts of these events have been similar. So that's true for Edgy as well. So for 3 years in a row for Edgy Redux, we've done a Nuit Blanche event, a Cabaret event, and some kind of colloque or community kind of workshop or public event that entails a lot of conversation. The way that's manifesting this year, under the theme, which is the end. Actually, before I get too much on that subject, I just want to mention that the Nuit Blanche event that you're describing from last year, the piece of art that you got a chance to witness and experience is a interactive curation by Angela Gabbaro and Coral Short, who are video performance and digital artists. And what they had done is they put a call out to artists to create video projections of the future, and then created an online website that randomly creates a tarot spread for you with a random selection of 3 videos, and then you watch them, and you can interpret them like you would any tarot card spread. So you can decide sort of like, how you want to read them, but it was only the second time the piece has ever been presented, and it was the very first time it had been presented with MCs, and the MCs were in character, and there were 2 of them, so that was part of what like created this weird gonzo layer that you're talking about, and I remember the moment that you're talking about, and it was really interesting. But that interpretation was thanks to Alexis O'Hara and Hannah Morrow, who were the MCs that night. So anyway, for this last edition, the theme was magic, or feminist magic, depending on how you read it. And this year, the theme is the end, because we are putting Edgy to bed after 23 years. So the way that the 3 events got selected, I think, was probably a combination between discussion with the board, and so a lot of it has to do with trying to be as cost effective as possible and still be able to provide programming that's interesting for the audience that we've cultivated over 23 years. So we do get funding from the city for Nuit Blanche. That helps take care of that event. We put together funding from the small amount of interdisciplinary presentation funding that we have to create a cabaret program for one evening. And then the community event or colloque event, or this year it's going to be the Wikithon, is very it's really minimum input, maximum output. It doesn't really cost anything. So that's how we're able to produce that event. So basically, I mean, it's all, for lack of a better term, it's all we can afford. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have a lot of added value and nostalgia. This year, in light of the theme of the end, Miriam was really generous, and after she returned back from her sabbatical, she invited me to take on the programming for this year. And in return, I gave her all of Nuit Blanche to program an edgy retrospective. So I'm really looking forward to what she pulls out of the archives, both video work and video documentation of performance work. So we're in the process of digitizing that, and Miriam's pouring through it, and we're going to come up with something, a really interesting blast from the past. And the Cabaret this year will take place at the Lion d'Or. It's a bit of a departure from other years. At different points in Edgy's history, we've collaborated with lots of different venues, galleries, performance venues like Mainline Theatre and the Sala Rosa, Tangente, La Centrale, Articule, Eastern Bloc. So this year we're hosting the Cabaret at the Lion d'Or, which is slightly larger than the venue we've been working with previously, the Sala Rosa, and has the added benefit of being a ground level access point, so people in mobility devices can access it much easier than they would be able to in the Sala Rosa. And from a performer's perspective, it has an enormous dressing room. So, yeah, and it has a bit of, it does have that glamorous Art Deco, Art Nouveau, Art Deco style, vintage speakeasy cabaret look. I mean, do you want me to talk about the programming that's in process?
I would love to hear about the programming. I also want to just add that I think it's so interesting that you're doing this retrospective for Nuit Blanche, because I feel like in the last couple of years in the Quebec dance ecology, there's been a lot of 30e anniversaire, over to go. And then, the RQD had its anniversary, and there's all of this, sort of retrospective energy. The RQD is collecting all these photos, and, I think that also there's a sense in the kind of political landscape that we've been existing in, and the funding landscape also, there's been a sense of perhaps, man, you remember what it was like when we could do the things that we wanted to do, or when we imagined that we could do the things that we wanted to do. And maybe if we conjure that with passion and intensity and revive it and think about it, and dwell on it, then it will somehow manifest itself into an equally glorious moment in time. And I've been thinking a lot about that energy, because there's a sense, as somebody who, only graduated from a dance program a couple of years ago and that kind of thing, there's a sense of sometimes, and when we discuss it amongst ourselves, those of us who, if it hasn't been very long that we've participated in the community, there's a sense of well, I mean, what are we supposed to do? Mm-hmm. I think that I'm interested to know, I'm so interested to see this retrospective, but I'm also interested to know about what you're doing for Edgy, unrelated to my comment completely.
I'm also, I'm just so pleased that Andrea accepted to take it on, because, she's done a fabulous job the past few years, but also I'm really bad at endings, and, she's, I think, going to do a really worthy ending, finally, a good final ending.
Cool. So tell us about the rest of the cabaret programming.
Thank you. Well, let's see. So I've been enjoying experimenting with different themes and ways of curating. It's new for me over the past couple of years. But knowing that Edgy that this will be the last edition, for me, it really necessitated a good closure. Edgy is the thing that got me through the door at Studio 303. It really brought me in and engaged me, and has been dear to my heart as a newcomer, latecomer, of my personal perspective. And it's been important to me to find ways to involve the people who helped, the artists who helped build the festival. So I want to tell you about the programming, but it's still 2.5 months away. So there are still a lot of things being nailed down. And I just really hesitate to say too much because there's a lot that's still knocking around in my brain. But what I can tell you is that we'll have a mixed cabaret performance program at the Lion d'Or. We have a certain amount of artists that are on board. I'll name names. I'll name a few names. So we're really excited to have Natalie Claude returned from her world tour, her 3-4 year world tour with Cirque du Soleil, back on board with us for the final Edgy. Sharing the stage with her will be definitely Dana McLeod, who's an Anglophone performance artist, video artist here in Montreal. Alexis O'Hara, who is an Edgy favorite, frequently emceeing with us at Studio 303 for our off-site cabarets. She's a musician and a drag king and kind of a comedian in some ways. There are a few other people confirmed, and others that are strong maybes, and a few more that are very nebulous and vague at the moment. So I'm gonna leave it there, but just to put that buzz and excitement out there. Yeah, the Wikithon. So the third event will be the community event, which will be this year instead of a conference or artist talks. It will be a Wikithon. So I've been really interested and inspired by the feminist editathon events that have been happening for the past 2 or 3 years around the same time as International Women's Day, which are an effort to address the bias that's present in a lot of articles online in Wikipedia, the online open source encyclopedia. So Edgy Women at the moment is a 23-year festival that only has like a 2 or 3 paragraph stub article. And there are dozens and dozens of performers that have been through the festival over the years. And I think each of them, like each season needs an article, and each artist needs a hyperlink. So we'll set up shop in the studio, and Amber Beerson, who is an art historian and Wikipedia feminist wiki editathon expert, will be leading a how-to workshop on how to edit Wikipedia articles, and we'll pull out the archives and sift through them, and it'll be a collaborative effort, and it'll be a community event, and we'll share some stories and learn a lot and laugh a lot and maybe shed a few tears, and it'll be, in my opinion, one of the best ways to say goodbye.
Yeah, I think that the important thing about doing a good ending is that whole issue of legacy as well, and one of the kind of subtitles of the event theme is Edgy is dead, long live Edgy. And I think that's a really beautiful way to encapsulate it. And there's, by looking through the archives and digitalizing stuff, then it's looking past, but to create content for future consultation. And same with the Wikithon. And I think that's so precious that Andrea thought of that. Like, I'm really, really glad that she did. And then just kind of ironically, I've been invited to curate an Edgy program in June in New York at Performance Mix, which was with the New Dance Alliance, an organization with which that we did an artist exchange for about 10 years, and it often revolved around Edgy because the artistic director is feminist and was often performed in that context. So I think that's nice timing. When she invited, she said, I know you're probably going to say no because it's over. And I said, no, Edgy's dead, but long live Edgy.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. No, that sounds like a delightful event. Like, I feel like there'll be like cookies and editing. That sounds fantastic. So I guess that now we've sort of discussed a little bit of the presentation, and we've discussed a little bit about the training. And so the creation aspect of the studio, of course, it is a studio. It's enormous. If you never, like, to the people who are listening, if you have never been in the studio, it's probably, I think it's the prettiest studio in Montreal. The floor is gorgeous. It's got all these windows. It's beautiful in the spring. It's beautiful in the winter. I love being here. It's like a magical space as far as I'm concerned. So, and it's a magical space for a lot of the artists who are able to participate in creation residencies here. So there's some creation residencies that have to do directly with things that you're presenting, like Metamorphose. Some of the other presentation aspects are associated with some time in the studio. And then there are also just sort of pure creation residencies that are not necessarily attached to something that has a fixed product date. So can you tell us a little bit about how that creation residency system happens and why Studio 303 continues to do that work?
You know, I think it's funny. I think a lot of residencies began because space wasn't being used, and 303 is one of those places. It's like there was just not enough action in the summer, and we thought, well, we should really give this away, you know? And it evolved into something that was funded, and, you know, and now I think summer's become this strong time for residencies, because actually it's not just here, it's other places too. So it's kind of an off time when we don't have evening renters, we don't have workshops scheduled on a regular basis. So we're able to give significant chunks of time away, sometimes 24-hour access when necessary. So we have the summer residency program that is more geared towards exploring and research, and you don't have to have an end product in mind at all, and you can show work in progress, and we can invite people if you want, and it's fairly open-ended. So, and then at Christmas, over the Christmas holidays, we have a technical residency that's more like you have access to everything, 24 hours, here's the key, can you water the plants? So that's for artists who, I mean, it could be research-based as well, but it tends to be given to people who have a show and they just need to work out the lights, or something really where they need the 24-hour access. And that's only for artists we already have a relationship with, because it's really a self-directed residency, so they need to know the space well, and we need to know them well. And then the other kinds, other than the commissioning projects, which you mentioned, where a residency is attached to something we're presenting in front of a public, we try to establish exchanges as well. So we had one with Paris for 3 years with Main d'Oeuvre there, where 2 of our artists in residence would receive an additional residency and get to go to Paris and work in a new context with a new audience if they were going to show the work in progress. And then we would receive artists in return. And for the upcoming season, I hope will be a recurring relationship with Vermont Performance Lab. Totally different, very rural environment. And they're the only the only constraint is that the artists have to drive. So that's kind of, there's always weird things, you know. It's really necessary for this residency, but we went, Andrea and I, to visit the facilities, and it's a spectacular thing, and it's very organic and hands-on, and Sarah Kofi, the artistic director there, is super invested, and so it'll be, yeah, that's great.
It's the way to get your foot in the door as an artist, because we don't have the capability to purchase your show and present it anymore. If you don't already have a relationship with us and you'd like to develop one, I recommend applying for the residencies. The more we see your work in development and feel attached to it, the more likely we are to find different ways of presenting your work in the future.
Speaking of not being able to purchase things, I think that in the ongoing financial situation that we find ourselves in as people making artwork in Canada and in Montreal specifically, one of the things that Studio 303 does is auto-production. So you can rent Studio 303 and present your own work here. So I have friends and colleagues who've done that. And I think that that's a really interesting way also to get your foot in the door, not only of the studio necessarily, but like presenting, period. Because I think that there's a sense of frustration that can happen where it's like you want to make things and you want people to look at the things that you made. But like, gosh darn it, nobody's giving you any money to do 2 years, or you have to wait 2 years. And so, and there's this sort of sense, the work loses its immediacy sometimes. It loses its, sense of place in your own existence as an artist. Like you make it and then 2 years later somebody's like, oh, finally, like take it to France and show it there. And it's like, well, I mean, one of my dancers has a beard now. It's a totally different piece. So there's a sense that like the passage of time, and I mean, for heaven's sake, it's wonderful to be given an opportunity to present the work, period. But I'm interested to know how much people are presenting their work through Studio 303 right now, self-presenting their work, and if that's something that continues to be an interest of Studio 303.
At the moment, we average about 8 independent productions per year. So that's based on my observation over the past 3.5 years. I have a feeling it was higher in years just previous to that. Maybe not much higher, but probably I would guess that we would probably expect about 1 per month, maybe. So maybe 10, 8 to 10 per year. At the moment, it averages around 8.
So can you give me like maybe a mini rundown? I know that there's definitely information on the website. So if that's something that interests you, dear listener, then please go check it out on the website. It's in French and in English. And but maybe you could, like, who is the best candidate for self-presentation, in your opinion?
I mean, my instinct was to say somebody with a credit card or somebody with a little chunk of savings, or a little bit of seed money. It depends on how you run your production. Frankly, if your question is about content, we're not super picky. If you're part of the dance community, we want to talk to you. Our limitations really revolve around is it technically feasible in this space? And yeah, and is it financially feasible for you? So we have everything from non-seated audience kind of installation experiential sort of things, musical concerts, contemporary dance performances as independent productions in this space. Sometimes we rent it out for non-party parties, celebrations of different kinds.
I guess maybe I phrased my question in a way that was weird. What I'm wondering is, if you look at over the time, as you see people who either, in your opinion, have been successful in their self-production, or who they themselves feel successful, can you pick out some of the characteristics of either what they were presenting, how they were presenting it, or what the resources were that they drew on in order to make that a successful experience for themselves?
It is really diverse. Sometimes it's super recent graduates. Sometimes it's students that have gotten together to present their classwork. Sometimes it's a touring company from New Zealand, like a really polished, high production values company that just happens to love Studio 303 or needs a venue at that moment. Sometimes it's people presenting dissertation exploration for their PhD.
I can't think of any recent names because, just because I just can't. But there have been some, people that started out like that and that are now being presented in proper circumstances. But I think that the important thing about the independent productions is just, that you can just get on it and you don't have to wait. I think it's hard when you're in the piece and you're producing it. Yeah. I think that's really hard. Or if you're kind of a collective, that there isn't sort of the spokesperson or your production manager or your technical director, But it's a really learning experience too, because I think you learn where to put your energy, which battles to pick, etc. Because you've got to do it in really limited time, A lot of inexperienced people who are inexperienced at putting on shows will not realize how much work every lighting cue is, etc. So I think Andrea provides guidelines, and Andrea and our website about we recommend not more than this many lighting cues, not more than this many specials, just to give people a few pointers and repères, And then we have workshops like Paul Chambers' Lighting 101 that is really just so that dance artists and other artists can just understand how to communicate their needs efficiently and also how to scale back their needs, I guess, when necessary, and where to put your energy. And then we also have an online publication that's called Taking the Leap that was written by Concordia graduate and longtime 303 staff member Lise Stevens, who's now freelancing, I think, at the Canada Council. And this was, a project that she really initiated, and it's amazing. It's full of amazing information to help, young artists self-produce for the first time.
So Miriam was referring to an online guide we have in the section under independent productions. There is a template on there that's a suggestion of how to run your schedule for an independent production. And I just want to say, you can deviate from that schedule any way that you see fit. That template suggests 2, 3, or 4 presentations over one weekend, but we have plenty of engagements that only do one presentation, for example. So really, it can be a bit confusing to see how to fit your project into our space sometimes. Just pick up the phone, give us a call, ask some questions, and we'll figure it out with you.
Cool. So your short mention of the Canada Council brings me to a sort of meaty subject, which leads us into the Cabaret Tollé. So I'm interested to know where Studio 303 is at with its funding. And so my understanding is that you lost the Canada Heritage funding, which is a longer term piece of funding. It's not necessarily something that you apply for every year.
Because it was consistent, we treated it as a kind of long term, but in fact it is something you have to apply for every year. So
I guess that if you go back, dear listener, and listen to our podcast number 63, I believe it is, we did an interview here. Allison and JD and Stephanie came to talk about the first Cabaret Tollé and about the sudden and devastating loss of funding. And so there's a lot of interesting and frankly shocking backstory that's contained within that podcast. So I'm going to make some references to it here, maybe give a little background to how much money was cut. And then there was a decision that you made to boycott the process of applying. And I'm wondering how that has gone, and if now that we do have a different federal government, what the approach 303 is taking will be now.
Okay. So our funding situation right now, we're fine for this year, and next year things will be probably pretty similar. But next year is the time when all the applications that we write are going to be kind of game-changing applications, possibly. So at the provincial and municipal level, the CALC and the CAM, this is the only source of funding we have that's called operating and that is recurring. So whatever we get, we'll get for 4 years. So it's really important, especially the CALC, because it's also the biggest amount we get. But I have no idea what's going on at the CALC right now. The deadline was supposed to be in February. It's been postponed another year because they don't really know what's going on either. There's talk of removing the disciplines. I don't know how they're going to do that. You know, they've made big changes already for artists applying. There's no more deadlines. So anytime there's change, there's chaos, and hopefully it'll be really great things that will come of this. And I'm glad there's change, but it's also a little terrifying. Also, we've been in the category of a presenter because there isn't a category for hybrid organizations. So that's the category we were in, and I think it served us well because there was a lot of lobbying and a push that presenting specialized presenters needed more investment. So that kind of category did better than, for example, service organizations, which we are as much of as a presenter for sure. They received a cut because it was perceived that the whole sector of service organizations, for some reason, you know, I don't know why, but that decision was made that they could lose 25% of their funding. So, phew, I'm so glad, even though I was fighting, I'm like, we're not a presenter, I'm glad that we were stuck in the beneficial category last year. What will happen in the future? I don't know. Will there be those categories? I don't know. So it's going to be such a lot of work to think around that. At the Canada Council, also major changes. They're shrinking 150 programs into 6 or something cuckoo crazy like that, and removing also disciplines. And you know, there's a lot of things in me that are like, yes, shrink those 150 into 6, get rid of the disciplines. But then when you read about them, it's like, what? Like, it's really hard to find the 6 categories are, you know, they're things like engage and create and, you know, this kind of words where you're like, well, I do all of those, you know, or we do all of those. So we'll see. And I know that hopefully their budget will be doubled. I don't know if that will trickle down to places like 303, who knows, you know, because you'll see some governments, like our provincial government, has a major hard-on for all things technological. So, you know, as long as there's like lots of equipment involved, you know, there's really like a lot of money. All extra money was kind of put there, despite a consultation with the Milia, where all the well, I don't know about all the disciplines, but dance and interdisciplinary were like, no, actually, we don't need more money for technological stuff. We just need more money, you know, to eat and stuff. So anyway, so it's kind of frustrating. And then I think at the Canada Council, I get a sense that and perhaps that's also with the CALC, that there's a lot of the extra money is going to go into being more inclusive of forms that have been traditionally excluded from professional arts milieu. So traditionally based, or, you know, traditional contemporary, culturally based stuff. I'm not, you know, this is just the feeling I have. So we'll see. We'll see what will happen with that. So did I talk about, and then Heritage? Yeah. Heritage is the grant that's the most pain in the ass to write of all time, because it's not a grant where you just say what you think. You have to kind of make sure you say the word Canadian every, you know, 2 sentences. It's also, it's like a really crazy legal document. You're entering an engagement with the Queen. You have to kind of, you know, if you don't put ink at the end, like incorporate, you know, if all your T's aren't crossed, they'll send it back to you. It's really annoying because that's where the energy goes. And it's they have a different fiscal year that you have to adhere to. So you can't be like, here's what we spend in our year according to our financial statements. They're like, no, we only want to know until March. And then the other 3 months you talk about, anyway, so there's a lot of things that are hard about it. And it's not a qualitative, they don't ask any qualitative questions. It's just quantity. How many Canadians are you reaching? How many Canadians are you changing? How many Canadians are you enriching? It's really this kind of line of questioning. So, when I decided that with the board's support and the staff as well, that yes, we would boycott that grant. Mostly because we had come to depend on it it's a presenting grant. So it's the only grant that pays for only presenting. And yes, it's a project grant, but when you've received a project grant for 12 years in a row and the amounts have been fairly stable and sometimes they've gone down a bit, and when they've gone down, you've had a long conversation and found out why it went down, and then you try and address that issue. It feels like a recurring grant, and so you treat it like a recurring grant. So
I think one of the things that I've been thinking about the concept of the recurring grant, and sometimes there's an attitude, perhaps, that we sometimes as artists run into, like when we go home for Christmas or another holiday and have a conversation with our family, and somebody in the family doesn't understand, like, well, I mean, you're just lucky to get it at all. There are lots of people who applied for that grant, and I guess you'll just have to make do, is the idea. And I guess that maybe what I would like you to explain is, probably better than I can, what a recurring grant, or something that appears to be, for all intents and purposes, a recurring grant provides in terms of a capacity for an organization, and then what that means in the greater artist ecology that the organization has capacity. And maybe you could speak to that a little bit, and about why a recurring grant is actually super important.
Well, in the arts, you really do have to plan years ahead, and you cannot plan if you don't have a recurring source of funding or anything you can count on, especially in this day and age there was a time when space was really cheap and, and everybody was on welfare and could live on it and had time to work for free. And, when you're in that kind of economy, it's not the same. But when costs are rising and you already need to find new sources constantly because rent goes up, salaries go up, things go up. But recurring grants stay the same. So you already have to, fight to get all that extra stuff. But it's super important. But it's important because when you hire people, you sign usually a 1-year contract as well. So if you want people to be, if you want to be paying income tax and, all those systems and enter into that economy, then you have to be able to plan ahead. And you can't do it without recurring money.
And also there's the issue of staff turnover. If every year you don't know whether you're going to be able to employ 4, 5, 10, 17 people, then how does an organization build its own memory? How does an organization create, it's like something like 303 that's been going on for a long time now. I mean, like most of my lifetime, it's been in existence. So, that requires some institutional memory, and institutional memory is not just an archive, it's people too. And so, it has to be hard to be able to keep people, and help them thrive and grow in their roles, and in their careers if you can't guarantee that you can pay them. Mm-hmm.
It's really hard. We don't have a super high staff turnover right now, but still, I think it's hard right now. We're understaffed, and I think that's harder even than the not great salary sometimes, because we've done a lot of things to try and make it nicer here, like, flexible hours and raises when we can, and just a pleasant working environment and this kind of thing. But then when it really boils down to it, when you're understaffed, you end up spending a lot of your time doing things that don't feel meaningful, and it becomes exhausting in a different way. I think, how can we be exhausted? We're working 35 hours a week. There's a really no overtime policy at 303 that's really strong. Sometimes you have to, but you take it back. It's not a job where you're expected to work. Mm-hmm. So I've tried a lot to compensate for the low salary with all those kinds of perks, but the biggest perk of all is to be able to pay the occasional staff, right? Nicely, and that would therefore to have good support, and to just feel like you have time to do what your job requires and to do it well. That's very rewarding. So
I guess that now I'm interested to understand. So this is the third Cabaret Tollé, and we now exist in sort of a funding situation that's very Kickstarter, Indiegogo oriented, and there's most arts organizations run a fundraiser at least once a year. There's an ongoing giving program. There are lots of things that arts organizations do sort of behind the scenes in order to sustain themselves. And so is that what Cabaret Tollé is? Or is it more than that?
I don't know if I should say this, but I don't think most organizations do fundraising because they need the money. I think they do fundraising because funders tell them they have to do a fundraising event. And that's really hard because a lot of organizations, maybe some really good things are coming out of that. It's not all bad, but it is a huge amount of energy. And if you count how much energy it is and how much funds you raise, when you're not an organization that has lots of business people on the board with contacts and this and that, it's rarely actually worth the effort, but you have to do it. So if you have to do it, you might as well make it into something you really care about and that's in line with your mandate and that's fun. Mm-hmm. And so this is a new experiment with a fundraiser. We've done other kinds in the past, and this is, and it's also, it was bringing together, when it was created, it was really created in response to the Heritage Cut. So it was an anti-Harper cabaret, a political cabaret, and the fundraiser was used also as a way of underlining the amount of money we had lost. And so it all tied in together nicely at that point.
So that was the first one, including Alexis O'Hara's amazing Stephen Harper papier-mâché head, which I'm sure we can find for the listeners to have a look at the picture of it, because it's truly fantastic. So that was the first one, was a very response situation. And then there's been one subsequently at the earlier part of this year in January. And now you've changed the time of the Cabaret Tollé in the season. But I guess I'm wondering now, what is the role, and what are we going to see at the Cabaret now that there's no big bad papier-mâché head to get angry at? Or is there? Are we going to see a Trudeau head?
You have to come and find out. It's a good question. I think, Cabaret Tollé has been trying to figure out its identity for the past 3 editions. It was definitely born as an anti-Harper cabaret. We've tried over the years to create a platform for artists to rant and rave about whatever is important to them that they're experiencing, in terms of politically, and in terms of current events. And so it's we've used words like anti-austerity to describe it in the past. The first year seemed pretty federally focused. We've tried at different points to kind of encourage the artists to look at issues from different angles. This year, we're stepping into a really different political energy for sure. Definitely federally, there is a lot of hope on the landscape and questions about the future. Is it, does it make sense to rant and rave anymore? And my personal opinion is yes, absolutely. Like there's certain struggles that just never die. So, I mean, we're seeing a lot, the taps getting turned back on federally, but we're still seeing a lot of penny pinching and cutting at the provincial level. What we'll see next Saturday at the Sala Rosa will still be quintessential cabaret, darlings of the Montreal cabaret scene performing. Funny, thought-provoking, very musical, deeply political commentary on the current state of events. There may or may not be certain impressions of certain high-profile politicians who are newer to the national scene. There may or may not be a re-emergence of certain papier-mâché-based beloved relics of Cabaret Tollé's past. I don't want to give too much away. I think it's really worth it for listeners to come and check it out.
Yeah, I think that as I was preparing to speak to you, then there's the question of, Harper versus Trudeau has really been really present for the last couple of months. This idea that it's 2015. That's why we have all these women in cabinet. There's, he's so shiny and new looking. My goodness, and it's such a different government from an image perspective, from the way it looks from the outside. It's very different. But I mean, I think that the question that a lot of artists that I know have been having, and a lot of people generally, especially people who have a particular political interest, have been saying is well, but is it really different? And I guess that's what we're going to find out in the new funding cycle. We're going to find out in the next couple of months in terms of foreign policy decisions, all those kinds of things. But it's true that provincially, we're definitely living something very particular. Is anybody going to satirize the eau usée, the massive dump? That's the one I'd love to see.
Yes. I think, yes, you will. I think the dump will be making an appearance at the cabaret. Yeah. Maybe kind of twice. Yeah. It's interesting what comes up, because there are also a couple of, Harper, he'll have a send-off for sure. Like he's making an appearance too. But it's interesting. We can't control the content, We just invite the artists and then see. And we were very anxious about programming this year because I felt like we couldn't complete the programming until after the election because it might give us more of an idea of who we might need to, I don't know. I just felt so insecure without knowing those results. And then, so it's been a bit rushed, and then the artists, how on earth can you know what your piece is going to be about until you've digested what's going on as well. So it's going to be a weird year.
So let's maybe just have a little go through the artists who that we're going to see. So Jacqueline Van de Geer and Jessie Orr, Madame et Ma Tante, Two Boys TV, Tufik and Alexis O'Hara performing together. Mm-hmm. Then Glam Gam, who are definitely, you want to talk about darlings of the cabaret scene. They've been producing a lot of work, so it'll be very interesting to see them in a different context. Mobile Home and Projet Iberis. Mm-hmm. And then there'll be a mini concert by Hua Li, Two Boys TV, I think. And that's another two artists who have had a long history with Studio 303. So that's who's coming. So there'll be definitely some performance art. Is there going to be dancing?
I think we're going to see dance on stage, obviously, because there's a lot of music involved in many of the acts. But we don't have sort of like a classical, typical Studio 303 contemporary dance performance in this particular program.
We did invite some contemporary choreographers, and it just didn't work out, and we're disappointed about that. It would have been nice to have some. Yeah, it's strange for a 303 event to not have a contemporary dance artist on stage, but we've got them at the turntables, the virtual turntables.
Yes, yeah, you have Elena Kreisfeld, and then David Albert Toth is also. So that's, how fantastic.
Yeah. And Yan Li Chen is a lighting designer for rubber band dance and former technical director at Studio 303 and part-time magician. So he's going to be doing some austerity-themed magic tricks at the austerity cocktail before the show.
I was going to ask if the austerity cocktail is on this year, and then at the austerity cocktail, there is a silent auction.
So the silent auction will go on before and then we'll close at intermission. So yeah, that's the time to check out the silent auction is before. And yeah, that's when Jacqueline Van de Geer and Jessie Orr are also performing. They're going to have a kind of little solo intimate performance that goes on, and Jan doing his magic tricks, and the kind of surprise act who's not listed here. Should I hush about it? The special guest. Yeah. A special guest.
Fantastic. I love this. This whole episode has just been filled with teasers. I feel like I'm on YouTube. This is fantastic. So, what kind of things, similar types of items at the silent auction, tickets, massages?
No massages this year. I don't know. Yeah, we have less this year, and we're not doing the online auction. We just didn't have the resources to put it together. So less items, but the same kind of thing, like passes. We also have a tirage. We're going to have a draw for people who pay $20 at the door. They'll get entered into a draw for 2 passes for the Festival Nouveau Cinéma. We're going to do a bit more live auctioning too, because it's so much fun. So new prizes this year are like escape room adventure for 4 people.
What's an escape room?
You don't know about them? They're super fun. It's these rooms where you go in for an hour and you have to figure out clues and stuff in order to escape and open other things. It's really fun. You do detective work with friends for an hour. So we're excited about that. And and there's one really great prize. It's a $500 or 500. Yeah, it wouldn't be 500 hours. I think it's $500 residency at the May. So that's pretty significant. This year we're also going to have, because of the season, we're going to have more affordable little gifties at a table, and Kelly Keenan's going to be looking after that. She's going to be selling she's obsessed with orphan mittens that you see on the street, and she's been photographing them obsessively for I don't know how many years, and doing performances based on them and all that. And she made a little, like a memory game where you match the mittens. So I guess she created like the other half, of these poor orphan mittens. So she's going to be selling that. It's a little cute, homegrown little game, memory game. And then a neighbor of mine creates, she's one of the people that creates this delicious lemonade syrup called Limo. It's absolutely yummy. And so we're going to be selling bottles of that, and also gift certificates for Studio 303. So people can buy, a $5 gift certificate, $100, whatever they want. So, yay.
Cool. I think one of the things that I just want to highlight is the idea that you didn't have the resources to put together adequate fundraising or more significant fundraising. And so I guess that maybe, unless we have anything else really pressing to discuss, I'm just very excited about this cabaret. I just want to leave on that note, and hopefully, I I think that you're right, that there's the more of a hopeful atmosphere now, and I'm interested to see how that influences the performances, or maybe we'll just like turn our rage on something else, and how things can progress in the future. So the Cabaret Tollé will be at La Sala Rosa, which does have several flights of stairs to get into it, just from an accessibility point of view. But it is on the 19th of December. It's preceded by the austerity cocktail. So it begins at 8 p.m., which will be the austerity cocktail and the silent auction. And then at 9 p.m., the start of the performances. And then at 11, there's the DJ and the dance party. So frankly, you can make a whole evening out of it. And so the Sala Rosa is at 4848 Saint Laurent, which is just near Saint Joseph. So you can take the bus, which would be very austerity themed. And I just want to thank you so much for giving your time to us for this hour of conversation. I really enjoyed myself, and I hope that the listeners are able to learn something about the studio and eventually come and see this gorgeous studio if they've never seen it before. Just come and roll around on the floor, you guys. It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Pleasure.
The Dirty Feet podcast is produced and hosted by
Produit et animé par
Allison Burns.
JD Papillon.
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
We have Mainline Theatre, Montreal Improv Theatre, and Paul Aflalo to thank.
Merci pour le soutien.
Vous pouvez visiter notre site web, écouter les derniers épisodes, lire notre blog, nous aimer sur Facebook et nous suivre sur Twitter.
You can visit our website, listen to past episodes, read our blog, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter.
Show us some love and help us spread the word.
Montrez-nous un peu d'amour et aidez-nous à passer le mot.